Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to the second CWA Speaker Series. My name is Alex Aller. I'm one of two student volunteer coordinators, joined with Tess Rose. I'm a senior here studying information operations management. Been involved with the conference since my freshman year. For those of you who do not know, the Conference on World Affairs Week is a festival of ideas featuring over 200 panels, 100 speakers, over 5 days, and attracting over 70,000 attendees annually. Over the academic year, we bring you the CWA Speaker Series, formerly known as the CWA Athenaeum. The CWA Speaker Series invites distinguished guests throughout the year as a means of extending the cultural and intellectual environment of the Conference on World Affairs. With that said, this evening it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Chris Moody, one of the pioneers of the social data industry. Chris right now is the Vice President and General Manager of Data Enterprise Solutions at Twitter. In this role, he works to make the world a healthier, safer, and more productive place by enabling thousands of individuals and companies to build innovative solutions on top of Twitter's platform. Chris received his Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering at Auburn University. Formerly, Chris was the CEO of Unit, the world's largest provider of social data, acquired by Twitter in 2014. With that said, Chris has done plenty in Silicon Valley to help growing tech companies work with their data strategies. He's additionally the founder and chairman of the largest nonprofit focused on the impact of social data. Chris's views on the impact of global health and safety has been shared with the White House and United Nations. This evening, he'll be joined with Kelsey Erickson, a CU junior studying business administration here at the University of Colorado. Kelsey's been a long-time volunteer of the Conference on World Affairs. And the evening will consist of a live Q&A discussion followed by an audience Q&A with time permitting. Boulder undoubtedly has a thriving tech community, and I'm confident you'll find this discussion of value. With that said, on behalf of the CWA community and CU, I want to thank you for all coming. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Alex, for that introduction. Really appreciate it. And welcome again, Chris. We're so happy to have you with us tonight. So the audience and I have a lot of questions, I'm sure, and we don't have a ton of time. So we'll start with a simple question to kind of give an overview of what we're talking about. Can you define big data for us in your words?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Thanks to Alex for that warm introduction. Don't worry about some of the past parts. I get foggy on the earlier years too. So to be clear, big data is a label, and in technology we love to kind of oversimplify things and create labels. Just as a side note about things that happen in technology, what often happens is, somebody that's pretty smart and really close to a bunch of different things sees a potential trend happening, and they get excited about it, and they create a label to describe what they think it might be, and then they share that idea with other smart people who say, yeah, I was thinking that same thing, and I'm glad we have a name for it. And then some people that are maybe less familiar or less smart start talking about it. And then it goes from a label to a buzzword, and then, God forbid, the marketers get a hold of it, and it goes crazy. And I love marketing, so I'm not bashing marketing, but the marketers get a hold of it, and then it goes really, really crazy, and it gets into this hype cycle potentially where a lot of people are talking about it that know absolutely nothing about it. And then the interesting thing is, and I've been around for a long time, you get to this point where all of a sudden people are like, man, that thing was overhyped. It really didn't live up to its potential. And it's about that time that it actually is becoming real. So, big data is really a label that people use to describe the convergence of a few things that are all coming together at once. And it's really the convergence of data, computing power, and algorithms, specifically artificial intelligence algorithms and machine learning algorithms. And so why now? Why, what does it actually mean? So from a data perspective, it's really about the fact that in the last 10 years, and really in the last 5 years, we have become a completely digital world. And what I mean by that is, as human beings, almost everything that we interact with other than other human beings have some kind of processor in them and performing some kind of digital function. And so, like, to put things in perspective, did you want a short answer? To put things in perspective, let's say, when I was growing, let's say you were a working individual in the 80s or even the 90s. You could go days, weeks, months of day-to-day life without really producing any kind of data that would be captured and actionable in any kind of way by a computer. And today, like at this very minute, the vast majority of us are spewing off vast amounts of data as we sit here. Because how many people have a smartphone in their pocket? Right? So that device is sharing data right now. Don't get creeped out about it. Like, right now you're telling T-Mobile or Verizon or AT&T or Sprint or PCS, whatever, like your signal strength, which is really important to them. Like that whole Verizon commercial where the guy's walking around and saying, "Can you hear me now?" That's not actually how they test signals. We're giving them constant feedback about potential problems in their network. Why are people suddenly getting a weak signal here where we suddenly get a strong signal? So in our day-to-day lives, from the moment we wake up, you get in your car is full of sensors. You get to work, almost all of your communication is happening in some type of digital form these days. We're wearing personal devices that are tracking all this information. So we have these computing devices weren't. Did you want a short answer? These computing devices weren't designed necessarily to capture data. That's not their purpose. It just so happens that data is like an exhaust from these systems. And it turns out that exhaust might be the most important natural resource coming our way because it provides incredible insights. Then you need the other two pieces. So it's not enough just to have a lot of data to better understand the world. You need the computing power to actually process it. And it just so happens we're getting to that point where we have the computing power. And then the algorithms that actually can learn from this data and make better decisions, specifically artificial intelligence, cognitive learning. Those algorithms are advancing very quickly and can actually take advantage of the computing power. And it's those three that have people all excited about big data.
Well, thank you for that answer.
Yeah,
it definitely explained a lot for us. You talked about how data comes to us and we give it out and all this sort of things. Can you talk about how the public will be able to use it, or also how it'll help us in the future?
Sure. So, to be clear, we're all reaping the benefits of big data already. There's no doubt that as consumers, we're getting better products today than we were before, because companies are able to make better decisions based upon all the data that's being shared with them, and we're getting better services. I think ultimately the role of big data for society and why we should all be excited about it, and there's plenty of reasons to be nervous about it too, but on the excited front, I ultimately believe the world is going to be, as Alex said in the introduction, the world's going to be safer, it's going to be healthier, and it's going to be more productive. And just to give you so many examples, and I'll use Twitter data because I'm really here just to plug Twitter. On the health side, like how many people here have had food poisoning before? Like most people. How many people think your food poisoning was actually studied? Nobody, right? Because unless you got really sick or maybe died, it probably doesn't get people's attention, and it comes on very quickly and it leaves very quickly. No pun intended. So so it's actually very hard to study. It turns out on Twitter, as one form of big data, people talk about getting food poisoning all the time. So we actually have this huge archive, in Twitter's case, a 10-year archive of people talking about it. And so we can not only start to study outbreaks faster of where there might be a systemic problem, but they're also using that data to understand if there's ways to actually get into prevention. On the safer front, data is now being used. You take natural disasters, right? More data helps us understand how to evacuate people safely in a situation, or alert them faster if they're in a dangerous situation. And as I already alluded to, on the more productive side, if you just take us as consumers, businesses are able to make much better decisions. That ultimately should be much better for us.
So it's clear we're learning a lot from data, but can you talk about how we're innovating with data and how Twitter is using their data to innovate?
Yeah, so specifically about Twitter, the things that are unique to Twitter are really two things. One is it's really, really fast. So if you're thinking about things that involve breaking events, Twitter is a particularly nice piece of data to have in your data cocktail mix. And so there's lots of innovation happening around things that involve things like breaking news or breaking events. We have a partner who specializes in discovering breaking news on Twitter, and their track record is they beat the wire service by 1 hour and 9 minutes on most breaking news. So if you're interested in use cases around things and knowing things very quickly, that's a place where Twitter specializes. So a great example of that is obviously within the finance industry. So hedge funds actually trade on Twitter data. So if they can learn, that's an industry where seconds matter, right? Traders actually pay extra for high-speed connections that might get them the information a millisecond faster than their other person, their competitor. So when you're talking about 1 hour and 9 minutes, it's material. So if there's a fire in a Foxconn factory in China, they can understand who are the businesses that actually get supplies from Foxconn, who might be impacted by that, and then they can trade accordingly. And then the other special kind of innovative piece about Twitter is it's really about consumer insights. And I've been in business for 27 years now, and I've worked with many of the largest companies in the world. And it's amazing to me, even at these enormous companies, how little they actually understand about their customers. And Twitter has allowed them this really unique opportunity to understand consumer sentiment and consumer insights at scale. And so we see all kinds of innovation around future trend detection to better customer engagement happening on Twitter.
Well, the future engagement and predictive trends is something that we're kind of curious about also. Can you give us any examples of your clients using predictive models through your data?
Sure. So it's a great question. The thing about predictive analytics, which is an area that people are very, very excited about, when I go out and talk to chief marketing officers, their kind of number one ask for us is, can you give us a crystal ball? Because as marketers, we're going to be infinitely more productive if we understand what's going to happen in the future before it happens. If you take something like product development, if you're a beverage company, it takes 3 to 5 years to develop a new beverage. If you get it wrong, if you get the trend wrong, right, and you spend 3 to 5 years, and hey, you think the trend's going to be double sugar, and by the time it comes out, people are like no sugar. You've wasted 5 years, an enormous opportunity cost to getting that wrong, as an example. The thing about doing predictive analytics, if you want to do it well, is it's actually all based on historical data. And so, because the way it works, in really simple way, oversimplified terms, is with historical data, you can build algorithms and make assumptions, and then you actually know what the result was because it's historical data. And so you can test your models and then test the results over and over again till you feel comfortable that you can actually get your algorithms are tweaked correctly, and then you can start consuming real-time data and actually make your best guesses. And so we've seen amazing things happening. There's one of the largest consumer product goods companies in the world has figured out that they can determine food trends 2 to 3 years in advance of what are going to actually happen. And part of that is understanding the types of conversations that spin up around a new trend, but also the locations where those happen. It turns out most food trends throughout the world start in San Francisco, as an example. If you're interested in understanding hair color trends, which change about every 2 to 3 years, you have to go to Japan or South Korea. That's where hair color trends start. And so you start listening to the conversations and analyzing the conversations there, and then use your predictive models. I feel like I'm giving you really long answers. Or if you
No,
fall
I
asleep,
appreciate
I
it.
won't be offended. No.
You're telling us all the details. It's awesome. So you've kind of talked about the pros of big data. Can you talk about any of the challenges of data strategy?
It's mostly challenges. So I would say, so the tactical challenges are, again, a lot of people are talking about it, but actually don't know how to approach it. It's a very hard problem to approach. There's a lot of new tools. The data is massive. And so a lot of people are saying, we want to be more data-driven. They really just want to be more insight-driven, but how do you get from data to insights? So there's just an overall knowledge problem. And it's a big part of what I spend my time doing is trying to at least start to bridge the gap there. But I would say the broader challenge for us as a society is, how would I describe it? It's like it's value exchange. And so, whoever is giving data needs to be receiving value back that feels equivalent, right? So if I said to you, hey, Kelsey, if you'll share your location with me, then I'll promise to alert you anytime there's a weather event that might impact you. If there's a tornado heading your way or a severe ice storm, you might say, hey, that's a reason, and this is a real life example. If you go to the weather app, you can say, I want to sign up and be alerted if I'm in danger in my area. And you might, and as consumers, some of us might say, hey, that's an easy trade-off. I'd like that value exchange. And some of us might say, I don't want anybody to know where I am ever, especially my spouse or whatever it is. We all make those value trade-offs. And when, especially on the commercial side, when we get really excited about these types of breakthrough technologies, we, as engineers and as scientists, we get really excited about what's possible without really taking the other side of the equation, which is, well, what's the cost around that? And so ultimately, we have to develop the social norms around these value exchanges that says, whenever I'm giving data, I should be receiving equivalent or greater value in return. And that's just something that's going to take time to work through.
All right, thank you for that answer. You kind of briefly mentioned the size of data, and we're kind of curious about that. Can you talk about the volume of data that Twitter deals with on a regular basis and kind of put it into our frame of mind?
Yeah, well, I don't know what your frame of mind is, but so think about it this way. In terms of on a day, you can think, in the neighborhood of half a billion tweets every day. Tweets per second that come in during high periods of time, 20, 30, 40,000 tweets per second coming in. And actually, and this is why some people, I don't like the big data term for a lot of different reasons, but a lot of people don't like big data because they would argue it's really actually not about big data, it's about small data. It's about taking those 30,000 tweets per second and finding the information that's relevant for you, which might be a single tweet. I mean, we've had customers tell us that a single tweet was worth, $1 million to them, right? If you're a company and you figure out that your cell phones are exploding before the media does, and you can address that problem, like how much is that worth to you? Purely hypothetical. It's about finding the right data. So in some ways, it's another label, which I also don't like, but in some ways it is about, our job as practitioners is about helping people find the right data to make the decision. But there's no doubt it's a lot. If you take, 500 million every day, and we've been at this for 10 years, it's a massive archive. I often describe the Twitter archive as the largest searchable archive of human thought that's ever existed. And you think about the power of that, and now I'm going way off topic. If you think about the power of that, we now know what the world was thinking about just about any topic at any moment in time over the last 10 years, which is pretty incredible when you compare it to what existed before, which was, a lot of when we think about historical perspective, it's told from one person or, a few people. And now we know kind of the collective thought of the world. And it turns out it takes a lot of data to know that.
It certainly adds up. There's no doubt about that. You kind of talked about this. You touched on it briefly earlier. And I'm kind of curious if you can talk more about Twitter's stand on the issue of privacy versus protection and kind of that you get something if you give something.
Yeah. The thing to know about Twitter is when we kind of go through our pecking order of what makes sense or not, our first question is this in the best interest of our users? And then the second question is this in the best interest of our users? And the third question is, are we sure this is in the best interest of our users? And after we've gone through that, and if the answer is an emphatic yes, then we'll look at what the output of that might be. Because the reality is, I mean, for us, the value equation is very simple. We have access to this enormous, valuable asset of data because people are willing to contribute their thoughts. If we lose their trust, and we do occasionally lose people's trust. If we lose their trust, then they'll stop using the platform. If you contribute data to our platform and the output of that is that you get a bad experience, then you're gonna stop using. You're gonna potentially stop using the platform. So for us, for lots of good ethical reasons, but also for self-preservation reasons, there's no difficult line. It's really, really simple. Users come first. We're very fortunate in the fact that our platform is public data. So the vast, vast majority of people that use Twitter are using it because they want to be heard. That differentiates us from a lot of other social networks where their data may technically be public because it's in a very long legal agreement that you sign, you click through when you signed up for their service. But your expectation is that your data is private. When people use Twitter, they don't expect that their tweets are private unless they mark their account private. So, and from a data platform perspective, we only provide the public tweets.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that. We like to protect ourselves, I suppose. Kind of talking about the users of Twitter, would you say there's one demographic that's most active on Twitter?
The great thing about Twitter, and I think we're finally, after 10 years, doing a better job describing what Twitter's about. Twitter is about finding out what's happening now. Our CEO, Jack, who's also a co-founder of Twitter and sent the very first tweet, he says using Twitter ultimately should be like looking out the window. Like if you want to know what the weather is, the first thing you do is probably look out the window. And for more and more for people, when they want to know what's going on right now, they open up their phone and they look at Twitter, say what's happening right now. And so, for us, what was the question?
Talking about the demographics.
Oh, yeah. So the good news is everybody wants to know what's happening now. So increasingly we see this really diverse demographic of people that are using Twitter because it turns out that like breaking news is important to everyone. And then you start to break it down by conversation. So obviously, a lot of sports skew male, but there's music, there's fashion, and so there's really something for everyone. The platform skews slightly younger, but it's amazing how many people here actively use Twitter, please. Yeah, begrudgingly. So increasingly the audience is really diverse.
Awesome. And you kind of talked about these newsworthy events. Would you say there's a big shift of the demographics when those happen, or a lot more people jump on, or? Yeah,
I think it's very topical. So it kind of depends on the topics that interest you, right? We saw a bunch of new people come to the platform around the election that wanted to be more involved in the conversation. And so that brings maybe some new folks that weren't on the platform before. But it's ever changing. And for some of us, I'm probably on Twitter once or twice an hour. For me, Twitter is really about kind of what's happening in the world that relates. It's mostly a work tool for me. Like I follow the people that are interesting to me, that are in the same field as me or in tangential fields, and then I follow my favorite sports. And so I find I just have an insatiable need to be on all the time. Other people are kind of around like, hey, I'm gonna tune in around specific sporting events or specific music events or whatever it happens to be.
Awesome. So continuing talking about the users on Twitter, can you talk about the power of Twitter and how users utilize it?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that Twitter is about giving a microphone to every person on the planet and giving everybody a chance to be heard. And that is, there are many use cases for Twitter, but that is definitely the most powerful. And we've seen, time after time, these very powerful uses where people that maybe would not have been heard. Were heard, and in some cases, action taken to. I think that is really the power of the platform. That combined with the fact that it's so damn fast, and so you can be heard, and and maybe action from that could come very quickly. Again, if you think 20 years ago, if you wanted to be heard, what would you do? You maybe write a letter to the editor. Right, and now all of us have the power of tweeting and having, a potentially very large audience engage if the message resonates.
Definitely, and users often like to share media, including video. What would you say Twitter's vision for video is in the future?
So I think it starts with the premise that Twitter is about what is happening now. And so our best uses of video are around live experiences. So interestingly enough, we'll see if it works. Right now, if you're not aware, let's see if it's actually happening. I don't know what time it is. Yeah, so right now we're streaming the Thursday night NFL game. On Twitter. Oh, sorry. I won't tell you what the score is. Oh my gosh. And it's a perfect Twitter experience because the reality is a lot of people now watch television while they're on Twitter, and they're absorbing the content, and they're commenting about it. And now we put both of those experiences. People talk about the second screen. Our theory is why do you need a second screen? It should just be one screen. And so now you can watch the game and see all the content coming across, which is really powerful. One of our challenges is actually the content is faster than the video stream. So people go, oh my gosh, touchdown, and then they see it on the video. So so that's so we're really thinking about video as it applies to live experiences. We have Apple's app of the year last year was an app called Periscope, which is a Twitter app, which allows anybody to share live, makes everybody, a broadcaster, be able to share their experience live. Last week there was a bobcat in my yard, so I went live, and I had people from Japan and Africa tuning in and asking me questions about bobcat. I'm like, I don't know anything about a bobcat. It's just there's one in my yard. I don't, but again, that's about a shared live experience. When it comes to, more information-based sharing, in a lot of ways, tech still rules the day. An organization called Pew Research last month came out and did a study, and they said, your generation would prefer to receive the news via text. People 60 and older would prefer to watch the news. And so that's shifting. So I don't think we're about everything should be video because, I think video is a very specific thing. But if you're, again, the next generation is in the I want information fast and I consume it very, very quickly, and hopefully it's in the form of an emoji. And so, that's, so we certainly need to plan for that. And I think Twitter, with its 140 character base, is well suited for that.
Definitely. So we're going to switch gears a bit now and talk about a little bit something different. So how does big data help improve the operational efficiency of companies at different stages of growth?
Wow, that was a gear shift. Okay, so operational efficiency of companies at different stages.
Yep.
So if you're a startup, the thing about startups, the thing that kills startups is capital. People run out of money. And so you start a company and then the clock immediately starts ticking on how quick can you make progress before you run out of money, right? You sign a lease, you're spending money. You hire a person, you're spending money, right? So there's this race on for how quickly can you gain traction. And because by default, you're very small and you have limited resources, you kind of have to make big bets. Hey, we think consumers are going to like this. We think they'll like this. And you only get a couple of swings at the ball before you're out of money. Maybe you only get one swing at it. So data is the answer to that, right? And so increasingly, we don't have to guess at what people want. If I take a really simple example of software, when I started my career, and for most of my career, a huge part of what we did was guess, or we used these really horrible qualitative studies, right, to try and figure out what people wanted. Now with data, it's completely empirical. You look at how people are using the app. Every day you're using an app on your phone, you're constantly sending feedback to the developers about how you're using the application. They can look at that and they can improve that. And so we're taking a lot of the guesswork out. So for early stage companies, it's about making big bets with much better context. And these are overgeneralizations. For larger companies, as you get larger, you probably can't keep up your growth, and you tend to focus less on growth and you focus more on profits and what you're returning to shareholders. And when you hit that stage, you're really about operational efficiency. And so you're thinking about how do I run my company more efficiently, and that's where huge gains from data. Let me think of an example real quick. Okay, I got one. So if you're, I'll go back to my wireless company. So if you're Verizon, you're dealing with an enormous, you may have 40,000 people in your call center that are answering questions from consumers all day. It's an incredibly expensive thing that you absolutely have to do. And so you want to figure out how to do that as efficiently as possible. Well, you can look at the data, you can train those machines in the background to help you answer questions much faster. People ask the same question over and over and over again. So you take all that data, you throw it at these machines, they learn how to answer the questions, and they can either answer the questions for you or say, hey, customer service rep, here's 3 possible answers. Our probability that this is the right answer is 98%. Our probability of this is 75%. Our probability of this is 6%. And just get the agent to be able to answer that much faster. That can save tens of millions of dollars for a business, and it's 100% data driven.
It seems like data takes a lot of risk out of the equation.
It does. It doesn't take all the risk out of it. We still get it wrong. We miss election results, as an example. But I would argue on that note, I didn't mean to bring that up, but on that note, I actually think that's a data collection problem, not a data analysis problem. But it doesn't. Look, we're not perfect. The machine learning is not perfect. The data itself is often not perfect, and so it reduces some of the risk, and it makes. And it also, again, just the speed of being able to act is speed to market is a huge area of impact.
Well, it definitely seems like data has a large impact on all of our lives and business and all these sort of things. Unfortunately, I am running out of time to ask you questions. So my last question for you is, do you have any advice that you'd give your former self?
My former self? I was talking to Alan earlier. I wouldn't let myself get so out of shape. Really hard to get back in shape at my age.
Perhaps more in the data side?
So no, probably not. Look, I think, as weird as it sounds, I think life is a journey, and you learn more from mistakes than you do from successes. And I really wouldn't want to go back and and miss those opportunities to screw up and learn from them. So no, I don't think I would go back and give myself any advice. And I made a lot of mistakes, still making them. my assistant Shannon can assert that, you can validate that. I make them every day. No, I wouldn't. No advice.
Well, all right. We really appreciate you answering my questions.
Yep.
And that brings me to the portion of the audience Q&A. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. I'll come over to you with the microphone and you can ask your question.
So obviously Twitter has a lot of uses and purposes. I'm just thinking, sports, elections, people just speaking their mind. But I'm curious what the original insight Twitter was founded upon and kind of the original purpose that it was created for.
Yeah, I mean, in the earliest days, it was, and it's funny because we've kind of come full circle. In the earliest days, it was literally to let people know what was going on around you. It was a way to quickly share, this is happening to me now. And it's again, it still has many purposes, but in some ways we're kind of back to our essence. And I think increasingly that's how people think about the platform is, originally it was probably more just the nature of how it grew. It was more friends based. But now it is, there's very little connection between, it's not a friends-based social network, it's an interest-based social network. And so in that way, it's not a social network at all. It's really interest-based information network. And so that part of probably has changed, but it's still about what, I want to know what's happening now. We used to be a little bit more what's happening with my friends. Now it's what's happening in the areas that I'm interested in.
I have a question about fake news.
Uh-huh.
Facebook has been in the news a lot recently for being a resource for that. And I know that Mark Zuckerberg has commented on it, and it's sort of an awkward place for social media regarding censorship and freedom of speech and that sort of thing. And I wonder what Twitter's standpoint is on this, or what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are very cautious about censorship, right? So we're not going to censor information. It's not our role. We really leave it up to the user to decide what information they think is relevant, what information is accurate. And the definition of fake news is so broad, right? If we have over 300 million people sharing information, and we can't be fact checking it all the time, and it's not our role to be fact checking it. So I think for us, our role is really about information dissemination, and it's really up to the consumer to decide what they think is accurate.
All right, thank you for that answer.
I was just wondering, do you think that big data is going to follow a sort of similar linear positive regression, like similar to like Moore's law and like processor speeds? Like, do you think that the chip processor speeds that we see sort of doubling every 18 months, that we'll be able to sort of integrate big data fully and completely with that increase of that linear exponential growth?
The short answer is yes, and I think we're, I was just last week I was in Atlanta. I was in Atlanta last week, and I was talking to one of the inventors of Siri, or the technology that became Siri, and he was talking about the fact that it was just a few years ago that it did not matter. Really, how much data we threw at our algorithms, we would quickly peak out on processing power of that, and we completely surpassed that. That we're scaling, processing power is scaling with data growth. So yes, I do think we're going to see a Moore's law type effect. And overall, I should have said this in the very beginning, like, we're probably 1% of the way into this journey. Like, we're all reaping benefits from big data today, but it's super early. I mean, in the future, we're still, the vast majority of the world is still decision making, as an example, for all of us is fundamentally about our own experiences and our own human intuition. And, like it or not, that is absolutely going to change. You're going to just have a lot better information all the time to make better decisions, right? And when you start to throw in, really futuristic things that aren't that futuristic, like augmented reality, right? Today, if I'm wondering what song is playing, it seems kind of state of the art to be, I can take out my phone and say, hey, what song is this? Or, that's like ridiculous. In the future, we'll just like look up at the speaker and it'll tell us that it's Beyonce, even if it's not. It's a flaw in the algorithm. So that, yes, that's a long answer to a simple question.
Any other student questions?
There's one.
I have a question. And it's more about the users and advertisers
Uh-huh.
and kind of what that circle is. And do you think users are, normalizing that advertisers are on there? Will there ever be a point when it's too diluted with advertisers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I think, who here thinks advertising is a good thing? Oh, that's good. Yeah. So, advertising becomes a great thing potentially with data, right? Because all of us, let's say you're about to join a gym, right? If you're about to join a gym and you get an ad that says, hey, here's a 30% off offer for the gym that you were thinking about joining, that could be a potentially great thing. Seeing relevant information it can be a great consumer experience. Seeing irrelevant information can be annoying. And so, I think it's on all platforms, all advertising platforms, to continue to hone through data their experiences, so they can deliver more and more relevant information. Now, every platform has their own guidelines, so you don't end up saturating people with ads. And that's, again, I go back to our priorities. Number one priority is, is it good for our users? And so, that drives our own guidelines. So we're not going to ever oversaturate people with ads. But I do think the magic place is when you're getting relevant ads. That's what consumers really want, and they're happy to receive, mostly.
In what ways did Twitter influence the minds of users regarding this past election and impact the outcome?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I'm not sure a great way to answer that. What I think we saw in this election is people emphatically talking to other people like them, and we saw a pretty big divide in that, in terms of people tend to follow people that either they're intrigued by their interest, or in many cases have similar interests. And so you had a lot of conversations with people that had one view, all emphatically talking to each other, and then you had other people with different, very different views, all emphatically talking to each other. And I think that is in some ways what was, caused the surprise. Is, you found people saying, I can't think of a person that that thought this view, or whatever it happened to be. So I think it plays a huge role. I think Twitter is an enormously important platform for political conversations. I think there's a missed opportunity, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, and I'm kind of now sorry that I brought up the election, but you need to realize that polling, which is what most of us base our insights on what might happen in an election result, the process for doing that today is still incredibly archaic. I mean, most polls are conducted by calling people on their home phone. All right, how many people have a home phone? All right, how many people answer their home phone when it's an unknown caller? Right, we're not talking about the masses here. We're talking about a skewed demographic from the very beginning, and the sample sizes are so small. There are opportunities, and we did see some firms, some lesser-known firms, that did some really excellent analysis on Twitter data to do a much better job of predicting the outcome. And so, one of the things that you have to realize is when it comes to things like research or ratings or polls, those are all very established industries with really, large companies that are enormous incumbents that have massive market share. I don't know how else to say it other than they're very difficult to displace. They're not particularly innovative. In fact, they don't really want innovation to happen because they might potentially lose market share. And so it takes a while to hit a tipping point. I think this election it will be one enormous tipping point because so many people got it wrong.
Well, I think we can stop thinking about that day and continue with another question. Any more students who would like to ask? Did I see you over there?
So you mentioned that it's not Twitter's responsibility to, sorry to beat a dead horse, but to fact check everyone on Twitter, and I get that.
Yep.
But as you mentioned a few times tonight, that you always think about what's in the best interest of the user.
Yep.
Is ensuring that facts are clearly translated to the user. Isn't that in the best interest of the user, or is that not for Twitter to decide?
I don't think it's for Twitter to decide. Frankly, I just don't think we could deliver on that promise. It's like, hey, we could, if we could also make every person on Twitter a millionaire, that would be good for them. But it's not really within our power to do that. And I think we could try that, and I think we could get it very wrong. By the way, we're way outside of my domain, my responsibilities at Twitter. So, good for me. There's 35 cameras around hearing me say this, but I don't think it's I really think it will be a failed attempt on our part to do that, whether we think it's best or not.
We'll open up the questions to community members.
Your tripart description of big data was really good. I think, in particular with respect to AI, could you speculate, excuse me, a bit on when AI starts to produce more data than humans?
Yeah.
And then what that looks like for platforms that you deal with, and if you wouldn't mind taking a Black Mirror spin on that.
Thank you.
So, and just to be clear for everybody, AI is artificial intelligence, right? This is the idea that that machines can take in this, lots and lots of data, and they can learn from it. And the more that they take in, the more they can learn. And the question is, at what point do these machines get smarter than humans and are more capable?
Well, the question is more when they start producing more information,
Yeah.
right? Like they're absorbing stuff from humans. They'll start absorbing stuff
from others. Yeah. Now, I think we're at that tipping point now. I think we're already seeing it happen. I think just the fact that we're I see debates happening right now about whether that's already, if we've already hit that tipping point, and even the fact that we're having that conversation is really fascinating. And look, if you're thinking like, hey, it's scary to think about a world where machines are making decisions for us, and and they're learning much faster than us, and they're much more intelligent than us, you should be scared. It's a scary proposition, and so it's totally uncharted territory for us. But it's absolutely going to happen. It is happening now. So so there's the good news is there's a lot of people that recognize that's coming, and there's a lot of thinking around it. I think we're going to see big components of legislature that ultimately develop around lines and guidelines because it is coming. So anyway, and my side note is, does anybody here have an Amazon Echo? A few people. We just got one. It's a really great insight into what the future is going to look like, even though it's still pretty primitive, right? It suddenly feels like we have this guest in our kitchen that just happens to know a lot about stuff that we might want to know about. And so if you want to kind of experience what this might feel like, that's probably, that's just like a really easy $150 way to kind of get a sense of what the future might look like.
All right, we have time for one or two more questions.
I get the impression that big data really hides behind a paywall, that if you're a startup and you want access to data that's going to make you better at what you do, you might run into a financial barrier. So I'm just wondering if there are some good free tools or workarounds.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think data itself, I don't think is the issue. I think what you're highlighting is a problem. I think it's the processing of data that's very expensive, or can be very expensive. And so where access to data is somewhat of a problem, although there's free versions of almost everything. Like, a big part of what we do is we monetize our data platforms. A big part of what my role is. But another big part of my role is making sure that there's boatloads of free data so that people can do the next innovative thing. Where we see startups run into problems with our data is not initially on the data, it's on the processing side. Now that's getting a lot cheaper and that's getting a lot better, and things like Amazon Web Services and lots of other tools are coming along that makes it more approachable. But I actually think it's processing more so than the data. One thing I'm really proud of is we do a lot of data grants also with things like academic researchers so that they can have access to data when, again, they're just financially not feasible for them to consume. So we do things like data grants and partnerships with certain universities to allow them to have access to data. And, self-serving benefit is we're training the next generation of data scientists on Twitter data, which isn't bad for us either.
All right, one more question.
Can't be about the election.
It's not. So I don't know if you're familiar with Things a Little Birdie Told Me, the book about Twitter.
No. Am I in it?
One of many. I don't think so.
Okay, good.
Are you familiar with the concept of like flocking or self-organizing systems?
Sure.
Do you have a impactful example of flocking that you saw through Twitter?
Well, I think this election is a little bit of a. It was a major flock up. No, sorry, couldn't help it.
Optimistic one?
Perhaps a more optimistic one?
Sure. Look, I think at the community level, and I do think there's an opportunity for Twitter to do a better job of surfacing communities. But we see these communities, form around topics that people didn't even necessarily were aware of the topic, and really start to build on it. Some of the stuff that's happening in Aleppo right now. If you guys don't know, there's a young girl. It's actually, sadly, I don't even know if she's still alive. She's been tweeting now and giving updates and really powerful imagery. The last tweet I saw from her was basically the shelling is bad and we're not going to survive this one, and please make sure our message is continued forward. And and so this entire community has formed in the West that I just wasn't even aware of that issue really at that humanized level. It's not really flocking, but I think we're seeing communities form around information that just wasn't as accessible as before.
Well, we just want to thank you once more, Chris, for coming and talking with us. We had a great conversation. I think we all learned a lot. So as you guys know, this is a CWA-sponsored event, and the conference is in April, but we still would love your support and to have you guys know what's happening. There's a table outside with more information, and the speaker series will continue next semester in mid-February, so please keep an eye out for information on that on the Conference on World Affairs website through CU. Thanks again for coming, and please stay warm tonight.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.